You're all very welcome to this, our third and final day of this year's Discovery Days. We've had some really exciting, I think some quite, well, I don't think, I know some very thought-provoking presentations so far. I absolutely assure you, you're going to get the same today. Different presentations, but equally thought-provoking, equally insightful. Discovery Days really are a fantastic opportunity for us to create a platform for new professors, our outstanding educators, our students and others to stand up here and talk with you and invite you to engage with them in conversations about some of the issues that we're trying to address, to deal with in our university, but also I hope some of the real contemporary issues of the day. So the format will be very simply, we'll take the three presentations in turn. Each of the presenters will have about 15 minutes. Actually, you won't have about 15 minutes. You'll have exactly 15 minutes to speak. And people have been remarkably on time so far. No pressure, folks. And after we've had the three presentations, then we'll come up and we'll have a panel session, and that'll be the opportunity for us to have a good discussion. We've got about an hour and a quarter. Want to use the time well, less of me, more of them. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, Professor Linda Martindale. Linda's an educationalist, and she's the new dean, relatively new, 6 months, am I not? It was just over, of our School of Health Sciences. And Linda has really helped deliver the curriculum, the well-being of our students, of our whole school, actually, through the COVID crisis. And we'll really pick up now on how do we drive and deliver a really vibrant school and ensure well-being as we move forward. So without further ado, Linda, over to you.
Thank you, Ian, and I'm really delighted to be here today to talk to you about the work that we do in the School of Health Sciences, where health and well-being is at the heart of what we do. I want to spend the first 2 or 3 minutes just talking to you a little bit about my own journey within higher education. And my journey began a long time ago now, back in the 1980s, when I did a degree in economics and French, so nothing to do with healthcare. And one of my favourite French authors, Honoré de Balzac, said that study lends a kind of enchantment to all our surroundings. So capturing here this idea of study, whether it's through research or whether it's through educational study, changing the way we see the world, changing our perspective on things. And that's something that stayed with me all through my journey as a student in higher education and working in Dundee in particular. Fast forward quite a number of years, and I was already working as a lecturer here in Dundee and doing my PhD, and my PhD was around education, and I was looking at an area of educational theory called threshold concepts. And threshold concepts itself is, at its heart, it's about those shifts in understanding, the kind of aha moments that you have. So think about when you suddenly get something, you get a concept or you get an idea. Maybe we think of a child learning to read. Before somebody can read, to an extent, their world is what they interact with. But once you learn to read, the world is opened up to you. It changes completely the way that you view things and that you see the world, and it can't be undone. So threshold concepts is about transformation in student learning and student understanding. And it's also fundamentally about educators supporting students to achieve that understanding, going through the portal, the doorway, the threshold into a new way of seeing the world. And the reason I wanted to highlight that is because as the Dean leading the School of Health Sciences, that's a belief and a value that I have at the heart of what I do every day. This idea that higher education can genuinely change the people that we interact with, our staff, our students, and the other people that we and they come into contact with. So in the rest of this presentation, I'm going to tell you first a little bit about kind of the shape of the SHS, the School of Health Sciences. Then I'm going to tell you something about what we do. So the work we do with students and our education programs, the research that we do, and the work we do around engagement in particular. And then I'm going to do a little bit at the end about how we achieve that, focusing particularly on building our community and working together. So who are we? Well, many of you will know, but some of you may not know, that we have campuses in Dundee and in Kirkcaldy. And that's a legacy of when there were colleges of nursing and students were working in a kind of apprenticeship model, doing their nursing education, working in, for us, either NHS Tayside or NHS Fife. And when nursing education was moved in the 1990s into higher education, we retained campuses in Kirkcaldy as well as the campus here in Dundee. These two buildings look very different. One is old, one is much newer, but inside they're the same. They're places where students and staff come together, work together in vibrant communities, and where they have access to all the benefits of a modern, high-quality education institution. So what about our student community? Well, we have around 2,000 students across our undergraduate, taught postgraduate, so MSc, and doctoral students. And of those, there's probably about 75% who are undergraduate students. We also have a very vibrant and well-regarded research community. Our research in our discipline is in the top 20 in the UK. And I'll talk a bit more about the work that is done in that research programme later on. But our students and our research work are supported by a staff community of almost 90 academic staff, and they in turn are supported by around 25 professional services staff, working together to ensure that our students get the best experience we can give them and that we deliver on this world-leading research. Within the university, we're one of 8 schools, and of course we're a professional school, but that's in common with really all the other schools in the university, where we have a big focus on professional learning, and that came through in some of the presentations yesterday for those of you who were here then. I think I can't really talk about the school without mentioning our partnerships with healthcare, which are local, national, and also international. But in particular, I have to mention that our partnerships with NHS Tayside and NHS Fife. Our undergraduate students spend half of their time in practice learning. And without the support and the collaborative work with Tayside and Fife, that of course wouldn't be possible. But we also work with those health boards in terms of the postgraduate education that we deliver and the research that we do as well. Of course, our stakeholders are not just related to healthcare organisations. We have close links with accrediting bodies, the NMC, Nursing and Midwifery Council, but also overseas. So we have quite a close link with the Nursing Board in Singapore as we deliver education there. So that gives you a little bit of an idea, I hope, about the shape of the school. But what is it that we do? Well, we're a triply intensive school. The university strategy at its heart has this idea of triple intensity. And by triple intensity, we mean achieving excellence in learning and teaching or education, excellence in the research that we do and the impact that it has in the wider community, and excellence in the way that we undertake engagement and enterprise activities. And at the heart of all of this is this idea of social purpose, of having a transformative effect on the wider community around us, and not just around us. So within the school, we mirror that aspiration for triple intensity. In our school, it doesn't look like this as 3 equal circles. For us, learning and teaching and education is the biggest area of activity that we do. So let's start with that. So as I've already alluded to, we deliver undergraduate, MSc and doctoral degrees. Our undergraduate nursing programme In that way, this year we will be aiming to recruit around 600 students to enter the programme in 2023, September 2023. So a big programme. And as I said, students do half their time studying here in the university and half their time studying in practice. But we have a range of top postgraduate degrees, MScs, and those are delivered, some of them on campus, but actually most of our postgraduate students are doing distance learning or online learning. And that's something we've got a great track record in. We've been doing distance learning for around 25 years, originally sending out big packs of paper and text, and Susie will recognise this from medical education work too. To students, but now, of course, delivering those programs online where the opportunities for interaction with their peers and with tutors is much, much better. So we offer, for example, programs around advanced practice, leadership in healthcare, and infection prevention and control. And then we also have cohorts of doctoral students doing either PhDs or professional doctorates, also some of them based in Dundee, but others based around the world. And to underpin the delivery of our education programmes, one of the things that is most important to us in the school is the student experience. Now, for those of you who were here yesterday in the second session, you will have heard my colleague Jill Milner, who's here today, talking about the way that we in the school supported students during the pandemic. And Jill gave a really moving account of the way that that was done. I think what came through in her presentation was the commitment that our staff have to the students to support not just their studies, but their other needs in terms of their pastoral care. And while much of that's done by our academic staff, we also have contributions to that from our professional services staff. And we can't do that on our own. We have close working relationships with student services within the university, the Academic Skills Centre, Library and Learning Centre and others, as well as working with the Dundee University Students Association to support our students. So for example, we have a hub at the Kirkcaldy campus, which can be used by student services and by JUSA, the Student Association, to help support our students. So what about research? Well, we do applied research that goes across the lifespan. We have a range of research projects that fall under two themes. The first theme of maternal and infant health is delivered by our Mother and Infant Health Research Unit, which is led by Professor Alison McFadden. Miru recently celebrated 25 years, and I think that tells us of the track record that we have in that area of research. Our other area of research is around people, health and communities, and we have three strands. We have rehabilitation, we have substance abuse and addictions, and that includes some mental health work, and then also healthy aging. Clearly a very important and current topic that we're contributing to. But our research is also interdisciplinary. So Professor Tim Crowdis is here today, and Tim is part of an interdisciplinary research project led by colleagues in the School of Medicine, the iDiabetes project. So a wide range of research. And then our engagement activities. Well, across education and research, our staff are doing a wide range of diverse engagement activities. But what I also want to highlight is the contribution that our students make to engagement. At any one time, there will almost certainly be health sciences students in practice in Tayside and Fife and other health boards. And every year when we have our student awards at the time of graduation, we get nominations from the public for students who have touched their lives or the lives of their families through the care and compassion that they've shown when they've been in practice. So engagement is not just about our staff, it's about our other stakeholders, including our students. So how do we achieve this? Well, I could talk for a long time about how we achieve this because there's lots of different aspects to that. But for me, one of the most important ways that we achieve this is, of course, through working together and building our community. Some of you will recognise these signs, which are literally at the heart of our campus on Campus Green. That the University of Dundee is a place for everyone, whoever you are. And that's an ethos that we have in the school as well. It's figuratively at the heart of what we do in the School of Health Sciences. Our student and staff community is diverse in its geographical backgrounds, the ethnic backgrounds that students and staff come from, and our staff come from a wide range of disciplinary backgrounds as well in health and social sciences. And that helps them to work together to see different perspectives. But our students also come from an even kind of wider range of backgrounds. So we have students who are coming straight from school, but we have large numbers of students who have already had careers, who come from college, who are coming to us in their 20s, 30s and 40s. We have students who come from what we describe as widening participation backgrounds. So for example, many will be the first in their families to come to university. And I think as a school, we pride ourselves on being able to adapt and support people, whoever they are and whatever background they come from, and to value them. So you can see here a range of ways in which I think we value people. So starting at the top left, we have joint working between senior university colleagues, students and members of the school. Then we have a graduation ceremony in Eritrea where the students couldn't come to us. So we went to them and graduated them, even though they'd never been to Dundee. We have in the bottom right-hand corner, two of our students, our student president with a member of staff delivering a workshop on World Nurses Day at Queen Margaret University. And then we have Miru celebrating 25 years of their work. And finally, students in Kirkcaldy hearing a lecture. But the way that we value people is not just about our staff and students, it's about the work we do in the wider community. So first of all, the university itself. Well, yesterday I was at a meeting with two other schools, the School of Business and School of Humanities, Social Science and Law, where we were discussing how we can expand a research unit that we have, a research centre that we have, and grow the already good work in interdisciplinary research and networking that we're doing. In the wider community, last October, one of our lecturers, Dr. Kevin Sterling, led a team of staff and students to deliver CPR training on the two campuses and in the two city centres. And that day, that group trained over 400 people in CPR and how to use defibrillators, potentially saving lives. And then what about our wider work in valuing people and working together? Well, at the end of last year, we also welcomed students and educators from Rotterdam, and they were doing their advanced practice students and advanced practice educators, and they worked with our students, members of staff from NHS Tayside and Fife, and also staff from the school, to share good practice and share their own experiences and learn from each other in the ways that we work in the two countries. So I hope that's given you a flavour of not just what we do, but the ethos and the way that we do things in the school. We want to transform lives. We want to have that social purpose of improving health and well-being at the heart of whatever we do. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Linda, and thank you for getting us off to a great start. I mean, there's some incredibly exciting things happening around the school and your future thinking. And if there's, well, all parts of our university are very focused on that social purpose agenda, but the School of Health Sciences really is at the cutting edge of that. So now we're going to change focus a little bit, and our next speaker will be Natasha Lushetich. Natasha is Chair of Contemporary Arts, Media and Theory. We're incredibly lucky to have many of our wonderful staff in this university, but Natasha came to us as being a recipient of a very, very prestigious Fulbright scholarship, as well as a range of other scholarships. She really is at the cutting edge of her subject, and her subject is very much as an interdisciplinary scholar, bringing together a background in the arts with a focus on media, global arts, sensory experience and cultural knowledge, biopolitics, a real interest of my own, and datafication. Natasha is going to talk to us about something that all of us are concerned about right now, which is how do we remember in a digital age? Natasha, over to you.
thank you very much for this wonderful introduction, Ian, and also thank you for turning up on a Friday morning and for supporting this event. Okay, so I'll try to say a few words about this. What you see here is an attempt by a close family member of mine to write a message to me. This person has advanced stage Parkinson's. And as you probably know, Parkinson's, like dementia, like Alzheimer's, and so on, are very often called memory illnesses. They're a lot more than memory illnesses. They attack the nervous system and various other parts of the body-mind. But the reason why I'm using this here is not to offer a medical discussion of what this is, but to give you a visual idea of sort of the slippage that is going on here. And this is somewhere between a representation and a metaphor, right? So this is not a fact. I'm not offering this to you as a representation of something, nor is it quite a metaphor. And hopefully you will understand why in the course of the presentation. So the memory of the world, how the world remembers, is essentially physical, right? So this is a rock remembering an insect. So there is some sort of physical contact. There is either the physical contact, one thing leaves an impression on another thing, or it becomes impregnated with that other thing. And this is also the way that we remember as human beings. So if we think of memory for a moment, you may not agree with this, as the meta sense that encompasses all other senses. And as you can see here, there are senses that have very distinct sense organs, like the sense of hearing, the sense of like sight, and so on. But there are also others, such as, for example, kinesthetics and proprioception. Proprioception refers to the body's sense of balance, right? And this idea of memory is based on the still current extended mind theory, which basically claims that the body-mind, so there is no separation between the mind and the body, is embodied, embedded, enacted, and extended. Now, what this basically means is that if you try to remember a choreography, say you practice yoga, or you practice something like Aikido, or perhaps capoeira, or something else, and you try and, sitting at your desk, you try and remember a series of moves, you most likely won't be able to do that. This comes back to us very easily when we are in the environment with sometimes even the community of practice, the people that we practice with, and sometimes also objects that we use in this practice. So this is basically what this means, that the mind is embodied, extended, and so on. Now, there are certain human strategies that we use. They're called mnemonic strategies, and I will explain just a couple. This also is not this list is not exhaustive. We remember through emplacement. We remember where we put something physically, right? But also the way we remember this is Umwelt specific. Now, this word is normally used, it signifies world, when talking about animals, to say a frog experiences its environment, life, perceptual abilities, and also what it sees, hears, and so on, in a very different way from an elephant, and also a human being, and so on, right? We also have a brilliant way of organizing information. We tend to say you're driving somewhere and you need to recognize a place or a boat or a person or something like that. You will be able to hold in your mind 36 different, say, traits or characteristics. The moment you no longer need them, you drop most of them and you remember 3 or 4. And these are the 3 or 4 main ones, right? Categorical grouping. If someone gives you kind of a list of objects and there's something like a knife and a blender and a glass and so on, you go to the first common denominator, which is kitchen utensils, and so on. Affective association, of course, which has been exploited by advertising since the beginning of the 20th century, and so on. There is also the connection between archiving and what we call memory institutions, so their libraries, their museums, and so on, and also the way that we think of memory as something that is quite stable, right? Very important in this respect is also the connection and consistency between personal and cultural memory, right? So say a person who grew up in an individualistic culture when you ask them, so what do you remember from your 6th grade? They'll probably come back with something like, I remember I was the class president in say 6th grade. But a person who grew up in a group-based culture will remember something like catching the Thursday morning train with the rest of the group, right? And this is very much linked to how these memories are distributed and how they operate culturally, right? So what is happening in the digital era? By this, I mean the last, say, 25 or 30 years. There are quite a few changes. And this, again, this list is not exhaustive. And I will not go through all of those because I won't have enough time, but I will just try and explain a couple of them just to give you an idea. So the implosion of distance, the implosion of space and time. And you could say this is not something that is specific to this day and age. Because if you look at the telescope, or if you look at the telephone and every other technology in the world, they change, reconfigure the relationship between now and then, or between here and there, as well as lots of other things like mine and yours, right? Before this era, we had things called originals and copies. That's no longer the case. If I send you a PDF, you have it and I have it too. And this is not a copy of my PDF, right? So you could say that this is always the case. This happens all the time. But what we have lost are intervals. And I will show you a photograph by Sergei Larenkov. So what you see here is a montage, obviously. So what you see is the wartime Stalingrad, and then a city with a completely different name for obvious reasons, 70 years later. And what you see here is a person, I don't know what this person is doing, sitting, waiting, looking at the kind of building across the road or something like that. But I would suggest that this is what is happening on a micro scale, but not a completely micro scale in the sense of the scale of, say, milliseconds. This is what is happening with the implosion of time. The fact that we never ever leave anything. So we are at home, we leave for work, and then we keep on texting and keep on communicating about things all day long and so on. There is no closure. Another thing that we'll we'll see here, this is a work by Roger Hyens, as you can see, and it's called Untitled, and this is a pulverized aircraft. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because, of course, this is a very different shape from something like this, which is what we normally see when someone says aircraft, plane, and so on, right? But you see, the difference here is that in this object, we can still see the initial association or the initial for this invention, which is the flight of birds. But this is now lost in computers which work with models, and very often with models of models and so on. We no longer have this immediate relationship. And then there is also something else, if you remember from the previous slide. I'll tell you what this is rather than going all the way back. And this is overstimulation and multitasking. And of course, we're all familiar with this. We know that it's not ideal, that multitasking doesn't really work and so on. But what you see here is a sort of humorous take on very early Taylorism. So Frederick Taylor's scientific management. The idea that you can mechanize something that was at that time thought to be organic, which is the human body. We no longer see the human body in this way. But what is interesting to think is that this is not sequential, as you see it here, how to mechanize certain actions during, say, a working day, but it is in fact a case of superimposition. Now, superimposition was first used in medical sciences, as you can see here, to reconstruct and to match the living being with the skeleton. So what this means is not that we are in the process of reconstructing something that happened before, but if you take a future, or if you reverse the temporal direction and look to the future instead of to the past, we are not at all aware of some of the consequences of this overstimulation and multitasking and so on that we're experiencing some of them already, but that is probably only the tip of the iceberg. So as you can see, there are various other things listed here. I won't go through all of them. I will just say a few words about the new digital unconscious. During Freud's time, Sigmund Freud, the unconscious was thought to be a field or a terrain of repressions because the 19th century society was very much normative, right? However, already by the 1970s and the writing of, say, people like Deleuze and Guattari, the unconscious was essentially a factory for producing desires to buy things, objects, to become who they want to be or think they want to be, and so on. So the unconscious has a very different role. Today, the unconscious is very much related to the fact that our data is constantly being harvested. Whether this is with or without our consent is not the point here. I'm not saying that this is irrelevant. I'm just saying that it's not the point right now. However, what is happening is that the patterns of movement, of purchases, of things that we do are not only constantly being reinterpreted, which causes not just because of acceleration, which causes retroversion, which means when events are interpreted in a very different way, as in a completely different way, right? So saying to someone, this is a death sentence, and then in the next moment saying, well, you know, forget it, just let them go, right? So it's that kind of difference. And this is happening because of the access to our behavioral surplus. So we human beings have become raw material for the various economies. And finally, just a few words about over-visibility. This is something that many of us don't even notice, but human imagination and human perception works on many different levels, and over-visible standardized images that are supposed to be facts are something that in fact drains the human ability to perceive. So finally, what is the situation that we have today? So how do we remember, and how can we make ourselves remember in this day and age? I would suggest that, of course, this is not something I'm suggesting, this is fairly obvious, that the world is both analog and digital today. But I would suggest that we, instead of using words like architectures, mnemonic architectures, and so on, to use words like kinetectures, and to take into account something that this age has made transparent, which is that there is no such thing as archiving. There is always an archiving, in the sense that when we create order in one domain, we create disorder in another domain, right? And nothing is ever absolutely ordered. So to take cognizance of, to become cognizant of the fact that archiving is always also an archiving, that the past is constantly changing at a much more accelerated pace today than was the case, say, 100 years ago. However, also that chronotypes are possible in non-places. Now, chronotypes are those sort of interactional moments. It's space-time interaction, right? So you go to a place like Istanbul, you have a cup of tea, and you look at the Bosphorus. That is a chronotype moment, right? But we can also create those in non-places. Non-places are airports. Say you're stuck in an airport, all of your flights have been delayed, and you spend 16 hours there and so on. By actually listening to something like familiar music and finding that chronotype in that music, so no longer in a physical space, but somewhere else, which also is very important for human beings, temporality. And then finally, the latent or the semi-latent rather than the visible or over-visible image. And this is something that needs to be cultivated, much like, say, multisensorial rather than only visual interaction needs to be cultivated. And I'll show you a very famous image. I'm sure many of you have seen it before. This is Claude Monet's Haystacks. And Claude Monet was an impressionist, and what people very often think when they see images like that is that these images are sort of extracted from a way of, this is usually kind of squinting at something, right? Looking at the environment, not really sort of looking at it, but sort of visually trying to get an impression. But what this in fact is a latent or semi-latent image that focuses on something that is important, and that is that the image is never out there, right? It is not something that is out there and then we perceive it with our senses, and then we create a copy or a remediation of that image. That sort of image is always latent, semi-latent. It never can show itself in its complete transparency to human beings because of our Umwelt specific perception. And the reason why these need to be cultivated, purposefully cultivated, is because it is something that is native to human beings, and that is the digital is draining. Now, of course, there are many advantages to being able to consult many different sources, right, and so on. But the reason why this is of particular importance is because there are processes going on, of course, of perception that are not readily available to these exteroceptive senses. So this is sight, hearing, and so on. They're going on inside the body mind, which is the reason why they're related to memory. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Natasha. And there's a huge amount to unpack in what you said there, and as well as giving me a different perception on Giverny and Monet's art. Digital is draining, I think, is something that we're all very conscious of, and how we maintain that sense of the human condition, the human perception in a digital world. And you've given us so much there to reflect on. Now we're going to move to marketing, but not marketing the way you necessarily think of marketing. So Thomas Boysen Anker. Thomas is chair of social marketing in our School of Business. And what social marketing is about where communication methods, behavioral science, business thinking are focused on making the world a better, safer, healthier place to live in. Thomas comes to us originally from a PhD in Copenhagen. He's edits and leads prestigious bodies around social marketing and in the business world, but also works with students on issues like campaigning against racism. Thomas, I think you're going to give us a very different perspective of marketing. Over to you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here today to talk to you about how to use marketing to change the world. It's always nice to know a little bit about people. So here is my life in 60 seconds. I was born and raised in a small village 10 kilometers outside Roskilde in Denmark. I absolutely, completely, and wholeheartedly hated school and was very nearly kicked out a few times, and I'm academically a very late bloomer. And poetry, and so I did, but I couldn't make a living off it. So I worked odd jobs. I was an industrial cleaner in a slaughterhouse. I worked in the pizzeria. I did dishes in a Spanish restaurant, and made enough money to travel with a pal in Russia for 3 months. And whilst doing that, we were writing travel pieces to a Danish national newspaper. I then did my national service and thought, okay, if you're going to make any impact as a writer in this world, you needed to have some substance. So I could no longer escape education. I applied to university, didn't get in because my grades were too poor. Applied again next year, didn't get into the subject I wanted, but had a fallback option, theology. Because everybody got into theology, no matter how bad their grades were. So there I ended up, and I actually liked it very much. And that was where I met philosophy for the first time, and it just clicked with me. Transferred to the philosophy department and did my undergrad, postgrad, and PhD in philosophy at the University of Copenhagen. During the PhD, there was an interdisciplinary collaborative project led by a marketer. And it was about health branding, how to use marketing methods to promote products so that consumers think of them as being healthy, whilst also at the same time motivating individuals to lead healthier lives. I found that to be so interesting. So I moved during my PhD to Institute for Social Marketing at the University of Stirling in Scotland. Stayed for 2 years, and that was where I kind of cut my teeth as a social marketer. So what is social marketing? As an academic discipline, it was born in the 1970s. The first paper in 1971 defined it as a subject area and sort of kickstarted an intellectual revolution within that field. And at the time, it was defined as the use of marketing methods, product, price, place, and promotion to kind of market social ideas, promote social ideas. It then quickly transformed into being something that has a very strong focus on behavior. And today, the discipline is, again, using marketing methods, business thinking, to influence individuals and organizations to change behavior for their own benefit and the greater social good. So in that sense, we're trying to have an impact and to change the world using these methods. We all know about social marketing and we all constantly subject to it. And we've just been, all of us, guinea pigs in the world's biggest social marketing experiments ever, COVID-19. So you were at the front end of social marketing communications all during the pandemic. So that's just to illustrate that. I would like to talk to you about 3 different types of projects I'm involved with within social marketing. First, fundamental research, which is investigations into research problems in social marketing just driven by intellectual curiosity. We just do it for the hell of it because it's interesting, okay? Then critical social marketing, which is investigations into the impact of commercial marketing, consumer behaviors, and other business activity on society. And finally, applied social marketing, which then is the development and execution of campaigns and interventions to influence individuals and organizations for the greater social good. I was lucky enough to get a bit of funding to do a project about graphic health warnings and how young people engage with the public health message or do not engage with the public health message conveyed by graphic health warnings on tobacco packs. We interviewed and did focus groups with young people in high schools in Glasgow, London, and Doha in Qatar to get sort of a cross-cultural difference as well. So when we showed them, and on the slide you have an image of the graphic health warnings as you can find them in the UK, and then one from Qatar. Interestingly, young people did not engage very well with these messages, and we found a lot of unintended consequences. So the one from the UK, where you have those very, very graphically hard-hitting images, so they're truthful depictions of what can actually happen to you if you smoke. But when you ask these young people, they say, oh, I know people who have smoked for 30 years. They don't look like that. So they don't relate to it. They don't engage with our message. The other one, the snake there, was interesting. It had quite the opposite effect. Some of them said, this is so cool. I really like that image because it feeds into a desire for having like a rebellious kind of attitude, right? Which many of us perhaps had when we were at that age as well. So from a social marketing perspective, the problem here is lack of engagement with your key audience and lack of co-creation with that target audience. What do you think, what kind of messages do you think they would engage with? First of all, they said, we would like a positive framing. Rather than trying to scare the hell out of them and scare them into the right behavior, they would rather that we as health professionals were talking to them in a positive voice, raising hopes, aspirations. In terms of negative outcomes, we said, okay, if we need to hit some negative outcomes, what should those be? Then it was discolored fingernails. They really didn't like that aspect of smoking. The smell of smoke in their clothes, bad breath, constantly being out of money. So the big, and that's interesting because none of those are related to health. But the big kind of social marketing insight is if we want to engage these people with health messages, we need to talk to them in a language and find ways in which they will engage with that. And then that may have nothing to do with the kind of health impact we as professionals are thinking about. Now on to something very different, critical social marketing. This is a research paper that was published just before Christmas in a journal called Journal of Business Research. What we did, and we were interested, I'm generally very interested in the impact of marketing, advertising, so on and so forth, on gender and race. And this is about race and racism in the business ecosystem. We were interested in consumer reviews. We all engage with and frequently meet consumer reviews online. So we had some mock-up TripAdvisor consumer reviews. And the only thing we manipulated in our experiment was the profile image of the consumer posting the review. So we had a white profile image, a profile image of a white person, an Asian person, and a Black person. And then we showed these mock reviews to 6 different consumer groups that were all racially diverse and measured the impact on trustworthiness. And unfortunately, as we actually were expecting, there was a racial bias. So when, by and large, white people, when it was a white consumer, it was being seen as being more trustworthy. The Asian consumer was being seen as slightly less trustworthy, and Black consumers as being the least trustworthy. There was a difference whether the review was positive or negative. All reviewers were perceived as being trustworthy for the positive reviews, although there was still that racial hierarchy. Whereas when it came to negative reviews, particularly those by the Black consumer, was being seen as being very untrustworthy. And mind you, the text, comma by comma, word by word, is exactly the same. It's only that profile image that changes, and that impact on the way in which we as consumers are reading and perceiving that information. And that's very difficult because we can't so if it was marketers, right, we could then regulate and say you need to talk and do your business in a certain kind of way. But it's very difficult to regulate consumer behavior, right? And it's a big problem for us because we don't really know what to do about it. We can do consumer education and it will take us so far. But because these biases are unconscious, it's difficult for us to articulate them and thereby externalize them and work with them. And in terms of social marketing, then this is about kind of exposing some of these injustices in the system. And by doing that, we hope that we do our own very modest, small contribution to social justice. So that was another kind of social marketing. And then finally, these are, I think these are wonderful. These are images or posters from students that I've been working with on anti-racism social marketing campaigns as part of a course in social marketing. And you may not be able to read the message of that on the black one in the top right corner. It says, before commenting on someone's appearance, accent, clothing, ethnic origin, hair, habits, religion, nationality, pause. Lead with kindness, racial microaggressions pile up and hurt. And the students, they were surprised about the extent of the problem, and they absolutely engaged with it, and they were fired up, and they really wanted to make a difference. And it's interesting when you work with social marketing that most people, as I said, I had a slide about the pandemic, we all exposed to it, but most people are unaware of it as a discipline. And so are students in many business schools. And for many of them, it really sort of pops their minds up in a way because it opens their minds, because we have so many students who love doing business studies, but has this inclination towards having that social impact, which has been highlighted as well as particularly in the first presentation. And when they meet social marketing, it's like, oh, I can do all this, and then at the same time have that social impact, and they really do engage with that. I think that's me done, and leaves plenty of time for questions. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Thomas. Well, I can safely say theology's loss was social marketing again. And again, working in university, very focused around that, uniting theme of social purpose, taking business marketing skills and applying these in a way that we don't always think about from a business and marketing lens. So it's time for us to open up to questions. So if the three presenters would come and join me at front here. While we've been talking, we've been getting some questions from those that are online. I've only got two from online. So this is about encouraging those colleagues online to ask some questions. And as you ask these questions online, we'll give people in the room time to think. But I'm going to start in the room, and I've already got two. So we're going to start here with Susie, and then we're going to go back up to the right there. So do wait till we get the microphone, and if you can, say where the question's targeted to. Otherwise, I'll make it up.
Thank you. Susie Schofield, School of Medicine. Again, three excellent talks. This is for Natasha and Linda, but Thomas, you're very welcome to join in as well. I thought it was really interesting, Natasha, you were talking about memory and place. When we do our health exams, so I'm in the School of Medicine, we stick them in a quiet room, in silence, on their own, and then we expect them to remember these facts in a busy ward, in a busy surgery. And I just wondered, and the reason I'm looking at you two is because yours was the talk that made me think that, and of course you're Dean of Health Sciences. Thank you.
Do you want to go first, Linda?
I'm happy to. And Susie, you won't be surprised probably at my response, because you and I are on an ongoing basis doing some work on this, but the importance of assessments being authentic. And you're absolutely right that much of the assessment that we do actually doesn't reflect the real world. I think within the School of Health Sciences, the fact that our students spend so much time in practice actually does give opportunity for genuine assessments to take place, both whether they're formative. So for those of you who aren't familiar, formative assessment is when we assess students and we give them feedback, but we're not actually giving them a final grade. And then the summative assessment is when we're actually assessing them and saying, right, this is the mark you got. And of course, they also get feedback. So, but I think there is a challenge in terms of how we assess the learning that students do in universities. But of course, there's also lots of opportunity, particularly through technology. And I think that's one way in which COVID helped us, because we were actually forced to think of different ways and to often move away from kind of standard exams and things and think about different ways that we were undertaking assessments. And certainly within our school, many of those approaches have actually remained beyond the kind of main impact of the pandemic.
Natasha?
Yes, I think I'll focus on the environment, right? And I think it's very important, first of all, when trying to recall something, right? It's very important to be in a contemplative environment, right? Where there isn't a lot of noise, a lot of things happening, things blinging and so on, gadgets asking for your attention. And then there is another thing, which is sort of the layeredness, the kind of the layers of memory. So a lot of the memory is sort of kind of controlled, if you like, to a certain degree. I'm not sure that is the right word, by the conscious mind. But there is also the so-called lower cognition that is going on at all times. So in order to remember something, to bring it back kind of fully, it would be ideal to have an environment where these lower cognition processes can also be as present as the sort of that sort of recall of, say, facts and things that you can then quantify. So I would sort of focus on the quality of the attention and also the ability of that attention to kind of go back and extrapolate whatever may be important for the specific task. Thank you.
Fantastic. Next question. Please.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to try and make a link between Natasha and Thomas's talks. Because Thomas, you several times used the phrase changing the world, and various versions of that are very common in our discourse, saving the world, changing the world, which is a sort of model of the world as something out there that we do things to. And it just struck me what a contrast there was with the way Natasha talked about the world as something which we're embedded in and which is embedded in us. And I just wondered if either of you could reflect on those ways of talking about the world.
Thomas, you want to kick off?
Yeah, I've never thought about that. There's a good question. So I'd say, I mean, from the outset, you're right. So from social marketing, there is always a problem. It needs to be solved. And usually you solve that by you want to change your behavior. But in order to do that, you need to link up with Natasha and understand that perspective, because if you do not understand the embeddedness of the individual in their lived experience, you can't change their behavior. And the example of the young people who don't engage with the public health messages on the tobacco packs, I think, is an example of that, because what is going wrong there is basically a lack of understanding of that embeddedness of the target audience in a world that we don't understand and that we need to understand, because otherwise we can't change it.
Natasha.
Yes, I would just add that we have to be, I think we need to be really careful with thinking of the world as something that is static and out there. First of all, out there, not a part of me, right? And then second, static, because it's always changing. But that is not just a kind of a statement of fact. It means that the sort of ideas that would come up, that the strategies, that the methods that we come up, we need to be like a skillful, say, Aikido sort of practitioner, if you see what I mean. Because when I was listening to Thomas, I found myself thinking, right, okay, social purpose, right? Is it a kind of a single social purpose? What is social purpose? Why do we want to change the behavior of other people, right? Okay, the problem of free will, right? Yes, of course. I mean, if you're trying to change the behavior of very young people who will probably die of, say, lung cancer at the age of 39, if they don't stop smoking in time, on time, then of course that is a good idea. But at the same time, I think it is very important to kind of be mindful of all these, and perhaps also kind of come up with different concepts, because the sort of the words and the concepts that we use are very often they're not fit for purpose. Thank you.
Yeah. What social purpose? Whose social purpose?
Exactly.
When's social purpose? So there's a whole range of things. Let's go to Rebecca now.
Rebecca Trengo for External Relations. Again, 3 fascinating talks. Thank you all very much. Similar to Michael, I also made a bit of a connection between Natasha's and Thomas's talk, but it was a slightly different question. And that was, given, Thomas, that I'm guessing that a lot of the social media marketing that you'll be doing is, social marketing is moderated through digital means. Natasha, given your comments around how digital is changing the way we remember things, what implication might that have for how social marketing is conducted?
Natasha, do you want to start?
Okay.
Thomas?
Yes, thank you. This is a very relevant question. I think we need to be aware of how much of the nervous system the digital is in fact reconfiguring all the time. Yeah, we generally think that if we are working on something and our phone keeps going bling bling, that it doesn't really matter because we can have a look and go back to what we're working, but that's not actually what happens, right? The medium really is the message in the sense that what happens really has to do with how it happens. And so, I mean, I could give you a very long answer to this, but I won't. I think that it's very important to also rethink the sensory stimulation in these messages, right? Because some of these visual things, I was struck by the fact that the snake, I mean, I was going to answer your question with ambiguous. They need to be ambiguous, because when you project an image and you say cigarettes, snake, blah, 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 death, and so on, people feel patronized as well. Right? There is something about this is only this and it's nothing else. Personally, I don't subscribe to that theory that, things are what they are and they're nothing but what they are. And this is not just about interpretation, it's about constant change in the world as well. But I think the kind of different sources of sensory stimulation and the effect that they have on the body, mind and the nervous system are key. They are the most important factors. Thank you.
But you could argue, of course, that the snake image, for example, has inherently got ambiguity in it and actually delivers different messages. Thomas?
I'd say that it's necessary to distinguish between social media as a promotional tool and then social media as a space where we are living much of our lives and where there are behaviors being enacted. So social marketing it's an unfortunate label for that discipline, and it was born before social media. So So social media is only a tiny part of social marketing because it's only part of the promotional P of the full marketing mix. And whilst my presentation kind of perhaps overemphasized the communicative aspect of social marketing, it's much more than that. There has to be a product. We have to work with place. We have to work with price and other factors as well before it can be social marketing. But you're dead right. And we need to understand the digital space better, and also how people enact, how they remember, and so on and so forth in those digital spaces, because otherwise it's difficult for us to work with people and try and change their behavior in that space. So it's a really good question.
So I've got one more question in the room, then I'm going to go to the what do you call it, the online con. Can you just stick your hand up again so you see the microphone? Fantastic.
Hi there, Rebecca Coatsworth. I'm the Impact Manager. Thank you all for some really, really thought-provoking talks. And it's a question to all three of you, really. We're used to an increasing role of tech in our lives for education and for trying to change our behaviour. I wonder if each of the three of you have any reflections on the dark side of social marketing.
Who wants to kick off on the dark side?
I'll start.
Go then, Linda.
In some ways, with quite a well, just with our experience of the dark side of social media, I think for health professionals, and the thing is that this then applies to many of our students across the university, not just to students in our school. There can be a difficulty with them understanding the need to be a professional in all aspects of your life, not just when you're on the ward or whatever. So we have had quite a lot of challenges where students are acting in the social space, sometimes in really challenging ways. And that can then lead ultimately for, not for many of course, but at times it has led to students having to give up their studies. So this idea of your professional identity, both in your personal life and as you're interacting online, kind of mingling with your future career is definitely for us one of the kind of dark sides, and something that we as then have a responsibility to try and ensure that students understand that and can then adapt to that.
Thomas?
I would like to link back to the research about the unconscious racial bias, right? And then the dark side of social media is actually pretty dark, because the algorithm which determines the kind of content you're being seen is this, or they are designed to feed you with content that you are interested in. So it will detect your preferences, what you like, what you don't like, and will serve you content based on that. That means that if you have a racial bias, for example, the algorithm on social media is much more likely to further strengthen and exacerbate that bias rather than actually untangle it and making you, because you don't get diverse content, you get more content of the same, which continuously reinforces a particular viewpoint.
And that picks up on some of the kind of points around overstimulation and others that you were making, Natasha, doesn't it?
Yes, I mean, there are many dark sides. I'll just mention a couple, and that is there are certain things that cannot be done online, and we need to recognize this. It's faster and cheaper to do it online, but in fact, we don't really do it as well. It's not reading online. It's not really, when you need to read 500 pages, you can't do it online. You can't do it on the screen, because there is something about data streams that actually affects your memory. And the fact that higher primates, including humans, actually use these two fingers, like you may remember Rodin and the thinker, this is not an accident, it's not a joke. We actually kind of think. You may have noticed that people kind of tend to touch a certain part of their face, glasses and so on when they're talking and thinking on their feet. So there are certain mnemonic systems within our body mind that we should understand and also respect. On this is as far as, say, dark sides go, but there is also, I believe that at some point all of us will need to learn one or two coding languages. Because the way to, if you like, talk to the IT industry very often is It's not that we're complaining from the humanities or something else, that this doesn't quite work as well as it should do. No, do this. Let me show you how to do it, right? It's like people speak other languages. They speak, I don't know, German or Danish, or, you know, I think that will be the solution to these kind of too many dark sides. Thank you.
Let's stay away from the dark side as much as we can, but accept it, confront it, and deal with it. And I'm going to go, speaking about online, I'm going to go to some of the online questions now, and with two questions that, Linda, are both targeted at you, but actually, colleagues, they apply to all of us. So let me ask them together and then go to each of you for reflections. I'll start with you, Linda. So the first one is, because one of the things that we're doing very successfully in our university that brings great richness to the university is increasing our numbers of international students. And so there's a question about, as we ramp up the numbers of international students, are we finding particular challenges in delivering on international students' expectations, particularly through a pedagogical learning environment perspective? Are there particular ways that we need to work that reflect that and address it? And then the second question, which is not dissimilar, is back to this online movement where we've seen this move towards hybrid learning, hybrid teaching, and there have been huge challenges to delivery of online learning as we've come through the pandemic. Could you each reflect on some of the positives that have come out of that in terms, again, of the teaching environment and how we might reinforce them going forwards? So, Linda, starting with you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll start with the international question. I mean, the very short answer is, of course, yes. I mean, there are a lot of challenges for us in terms of making sure that international students have an excellent experience. What I'll maybe pick up on is, I think there are some differences between what the type of international students. So, for example, within our school, as in other schools, we've had collaborations and partnerships overseas, where students either come to Dundee or we perhaps go and teach in country. I think that in some ways that's slightly easier because you can do some groundwork around the culture of the country that you're going into. So, for example, we teach students in Singapore, and so we've had to spend some time understanding the Singapore perspective. For example, the way that these students will have received their initial education in Singapore, and that can then help us to prepare for supporting those students when we actually start teaching them. I think for having students coming to Dundee on what we call open recruitment, so we can have students on a programme who are from lots of different parts of the world, the answer is that international student isn't a person. It's lots and lots of different people coming from lots of different cultural, religious, ethnic backgrounds. And the challenge for us is then how to adapt to that kind of multiplicity of different people and be inclusive and value that diversity, but then in an inclusive way. However, I do think we also can focus on the richness that brings to our programmes, and I think it helps our home students enormously to see different perspectives of students that are coming from different countries. But certainly as educators, plenty of challenges, and in our school we've put in additional support from educators for our international students so that we can help them through, just understanding what UK higher education means, because it's likely to be very different to the system that they've come from.
And online platforms, pluses as well as minuses?
From the pandemic, definitely lots of pluses and probably pluses that we're still finding out. I think in many ways it forced us to upskill staff, hopefully upskill students, and to try out and use different types of technology in ways that we were taking very slowly with kind of baby steps, and actually we were just forced to have to do that. And so that has changed now the way that we are thinking about our education as we go forward. I think there have been some other benefits of COVID as well, if you don't mind me just adding, in terms of the way that we support students as well. I think we've got a much heightened awareness of students' needs, not just for their studies, but their pastoral needs, their mental health as well, and actually also for staff as well. I mean, we've recently in the school, as in other schools have done, appointed an Associate Dean for Culture and People, and Elaine is here today. And I think that reflects the fact that through the pandemic, we've actually, as a university, become much more aware of the needs of our staff and how to value and support our staff as well.
Thanks, Linda. Briefly, Thomas.
I think that's going to be about the positive outcomes of the pandemic. So universities are really interesting places, and they have multiple different types of cultures within them. And there is usually quite a big difference between those who are academic colleagues, and then administrative and professional services colleagues. And quite often, those who have been on the sort of more administrative side have been told you cannot work from home. I'm not speaking of Dundee specifically. I was at Glasgow at the time. But all of a sudden, all those perceptions about what we cannot do, they were just completely bombarded by the pandemic. And within 2 weeks, the entire institution was online. Everybody was online. So in a sense, a good outcome of the pandemic is that many, many groups of workers and employees have experienced a social liberation, right? And I think we need to be aware of that and and keep that, and then find new ways of working where we are much better at doing that hybrid that will kind of enable us to live our lives in a new kind of way. So I think that's a hugely positive outcome.
And there's a big shift in expectation as well, isn't there?
Completely.
In terms of what people expect from the relationship with their employer, and indeed the way that we can all work together in delivery. Natasha.
Yes, just very briefly, I think that on a more kind of, this is a more humanities, if you like, perspective, that the fact that people were kind of working together from very different locations and very different environments and so on, contributed to understanding different people's different subject positions. Because you saw them there in their home with their cat and whatnot. And there was something about kind of doing this on a regular basis that helped people to understand, I wouldn't say difference as such, but these kind of perhaps small differences of why someone was kind of coming from a certain position and so on. So that for me was definitely something that was a huge plus in the kind of use of online technology during and after the pandemic.
And I think, as you've all said, still a lot to learn, and we're very much on a journey there. Folks, I know there are other questions in the room, but time's against us. I apologise. We will have a coffee break. I hope that speakers will be around during the coffee break, so do pick up questions with them then. It just remains for me to thank all of you as an audience for staying with us, for being engaged in this morning's discussions, for asking such great questions. And please join me in thanking our speakers.
Great.